Last year, I had the chance to visit New York City. It was my first time in the city, and I was very excited. I had seen pictures and videos of New York before, but now I was going to see it with my own eyes. I flew on a plane to New York, and the flight was long, but I couldn't wait to arrive. When I landed at the airport, I was amazed by how big everything was. There were so many people, cars, and tall buildings everywhere. I took a yellow taxi from the airport to my hotel in Manhattan. The drive to the hotel was interesting because I could see all the tall buildings and busy streets. Everything looked so fast and lively. When I arrived at the hotel, I quickly checked in, dropped off my bags, and went out to explore the city. On my first day, I decided to visit Times Square. I had heard a lot about this place, and I wanted to see it. When I arrived, I was amazed. Times Square was full of bright lights, huge signs, and so many people walking around. It felt like the city never sleeps. I walked around, took lots of pictures, and even bought a small souvenir. I saw shops everywhere, and many people were visiting them. There were big screens with advertisements, and it was very exciting to be there. I stayed in Times Square for a few hours, just looking at everything and enjoying the busy atmosphere. The next day, I wanted to visit a quiet place, so I went to Central Park. Central Park is a big park in the middle of New York City, and it is very beautiful. It was a nice change from the busy streets. I walked in the park, and it was very peaceful. I saw many trees, flowers, and people having picnics or riding bikes. I sat on a bench for a while and watched people walk by. Some people were running, some were walking their dogs, and others were just relaxing. It was a nice break from the noise of the city. After spending time in Central Park, I went to see one of the most famous places in New York, the Statue of Liberty. I took a boat to Liberty Island, where the statue is located. On the boat, I could see the statue from far away, and it looked very big. When I arrived on the island, I got closer to the statue, and it was even bigger than I imagined. The Statue of Liberty is very important because it is a symbol of freedom. Later, I visited the Empire State Building. This is one of the tallest buildings in New York City. I took an elevator to the top of the building, and when I got there, the view was amazing. I could see the entire city from the top. The buildings, the streets, and even the bridges looked small from up there. I stayed at the top for a long time, just looking at the beautiful view. It was one of my favorite moments in New York. During my trip, I also tried some famous New York food. I had pizza from a local pizzeria, and it was the best pizza I've ever had. I also bought a hot dog from a street vendor, and it was very delicious. Eating the food in New York made me feel like a true New Yorker. My trip to New York City was one of the best experiences of my life. The city is full of life, and there is always something to see or do. I loved visiting all the famous places, walking through the busy streets, and trying the food. I hope I can visit New York City again one day because there is still so much more to explore. After visiting the famous places like Times Square, Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, and the Empire State Building, I still had more time in New York City. So, on my next day, I decided to explore some new areas of the city. I had heard about a place called the Brooklyn Bridge. It is a very famous bridge that connects Manhattan to Brooklyn, and many people walk across it. I wanted to do that too. There were many other people walking, and some were riding their bikes. As I walked, I stopped to take pictures because the view was so nice. I could see the boats in the water below and the blue sky above. Walking across the bridge was very relaxing, and I was happy I did it. After crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, I went to a place called Brooklyn Heights. It's a neighborhood in Brooklyn that has many old houses and beautiful streets. I walked around, looking at the nice homes and small shops. It was quieter than Manhattan, and I liked the peaceful feeling. I stopped at a small cafe to have a coffee and rest for a while. The cafe was cozy, and the people were very friendly. In the afternoon, I visited a famous museum called the Museum of Modern Art, or MoMA for short. This museum has many interesting paintings, sculptures, and other types of art. I'm not an expert in art, but I enjoyed looking at the colorful paintings and unique designs. Some of the art was very big, and some were small, but all of it was interesting. I walked through the museum for a few hours, and I learned a lot about modern art. That evening, I wanted to do something special, so I went to a Broadway show. Broadway is famous for its theaters and shows. I bought a ticket to see a musical. When I arrived at the theater, it was full of people. The show was amazing. The actors were singing and dancing, and the music was beautiful. I had never seen a show like this before, and it was one of the best parts of my trip. Everyone in the theater clapped and cheered at the end of the show. It was a perfect way to end my day. On my last day in New York, I decided to take it easy and just enjoy walking around the city. I went to some shops, bought a few more souvenirs, and stopped for lunch at a small restaurant. I walked through some streets I hadn't seen before and found some quiet parks where I could sit and relax. Even though New York City is very busy, there are always places to find peace and quiet. As my trip came to an end, I thought about all the things I had seen and done. New York City is such a big and exciting place. I felt like I had only seen a small part of it. But I was happy with everything I experienced. The tall buildings, the busy streets, the famous places, and the friendly people made my trip special. When it was time to go back to the airport and fly home, I felt a little sad to leave, but I knew I would come back one day. There is still so much more to explore in New York City. And I can't wait for my next adventure in this amazing city. As I sat in the taxi on my way to the airport, I thought about all the memories I made in New York City. I remembered the bright lights of Times Square, the beautiful trees in Central Park, and the amazing view from the Empire State Building. Each moment was special, and I felt grateful for my trip. When I arrived at the airport, I checked in for my flight. I was a little sad to leave, but I was also excited to share my stories with my family and friends. I bought a small notebook at a shop in the airport to write down my memories of the trip. I wanted to remember every detail, from the delicious food to the fun experiences. While I waited for my flight, I looked at the pictures I took on my phone. I smiled at the photo of me standing in front of the Statue of Liberty and the one of me eating pizza in a small restaurant. I also loved the picture of the view from the Brooklyn Bridge, with the sun shining on the water. Each photo brought back happy memories. Finally, it was time to board the plane. I found my seat and settled in. As the plane took off, I looked out the window and saw the city getting smaller and smaller. I felt a mix of emotions, sadness because I was leaving, but also happiness because I had such a great time. During the flight, I thought about what I would tell my family. I would share stories about my adventures, the friends I met, and the delicious food I ate. I knew they would be excited to hear everything. I wanted to show them my pictures and tell them about my favorite places. When I arrived home, my family was waiting for me at the airport. They were happy to see me, and I was happy to see them too. I couldn't wait to tell them all about my trip. I showed them the souvenirs I bought, like a small statue of the Statue of Liberty and a t-shirt that said, I Red Heart #NY. They loved them. That night, I sat down with my family to share my stories. I told them about Times Square, Central Park, and the Empire State Building. I described the Broadway show and how the actors sang and danced. My family listened with big smiles on their faces. They were excited to hear about everything I did. After my stories, I showed them all the photos I took. We laughed at some pictures and smiled at others. It was nice to share my experiences with them. I could see that they felt like they were in New York City with me. As I went to bed that night, I felt very happy. My trip to New York City was unforgettable. I learned a lot, saw beautiful things, and had fun. I knew I would always remember this trip and the special moments I had. I also thought about my next adventure and where I would go next. New York City taught me that the world is big and full of wonderful places to explore. I couldn't wait to travel again and see more amazing cities. Until then, I would hold on to my memories of New York City and dream about my next journey. After returning home from New York City, I found myself daydreaming about my next adventure. The excitement of the trip stayed with me, and I wanted to explore more places around the world. I realized that traveling was not just about visiting new places, it was also about meeting new people, learning about different cultures, and experiencing life in a new way. As the days passed, I started to talk to my friends about my trip. I shared my stories with them at school. They listened with excitement and asked many questions. What was your favorite place? They asked. I told them it was hard to choose, but Times Square was very special because of the bright lights and energy. I also loved Central Park because it was peaceful and beautiful. Some of my friends wanted to go to New York City too. They asked me for tips on where to go and what to do. I made a small list for them. I wrote down my favorite places: Times Square, Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, and the Empire State Building. I also included the best food to try, like pizza and hot dogs. It felt great to share my experiences and help my friends plan their trips. One day, I went to the library and found books about different cities around the world. I was curious about places like Paris, Tokyo, and Rome. I wanted to learn more about their cultures, food, and famous sites. I read about the Eiffel Tower in Paris, the cherry blossoms in Tokyo, and the Colosseum in Rome. Each city sounded amazing, and I dreamed about visiting them one day. I also started saving money for my next trip. I got a small jar and put my allowance and any extra money I earned into it. I wanted to go on another adventure, maybe even a bigger one. I knew that traveling takes time and money, but I was determined to make it happen. I told myself that one day I would visit those beautiful cities I read about. As I continued to plan my future travels, I also looked back at my trip to New York City with gratitude. It opened my eyes to how big and diverse the world is. I learned to be brave and try new things, like taking the subway and talking to strangers. I realized that everyone has a story, and every place has its own unique charm. With my dreams of travel growing, I started to write a travel journal. In it, I wrote about my experiences in New York City and my dreams for future trips. I wrote about the places I wanted to visit, the food I wanted to try, and the things I wanted to learn. Writing in my journal helped me stay focused on my goal of traveling more. Sometimes, I would sit with my family and talk about places we could visit together. We talked about going to a beach or visiting a national park. We even dreamed about going to New York City again. My family liked the idea, and we made plans to save money for a family trip. Every night before bed, I would read my travel journal and look at my pictures from New York City. I smiled as I remembered all the fun I had. I felt grateful for the experiences and the memories I created. Each day, my excitement grew, and I couldn't wait to see where my next adventure would take me. As the months went by, my excitement for travel only grew stronger. I continued to save money in my jar and kept adding to my travel journal. I often found myself dreaming about where I wanted to go next. I wanted to explore new cultures, taste different foods, and meet new people. One day, while I was at school, my teacher announced a project about different countries. We could choose any country we wanted to research. I immediately thought of New York City again and how much I loved it. But I also wanted to learn about a different place, so I decided to choose Japan. I had read about its beautiful cherry blossoms and delicious sushi, and I was excited to learn more. I spent a lot of time in the library looking for books and articles about Japan. I learned about its culture, traditions, and famous places. I read about Tokyo, the busy capital city, and Kyoto, which is known for its temples and gardens. I discovered that Japan has beautiful festivals, delicious food like ramen and sushi, and unique art forms like origami. As I worked on my project, I felt inspired. I wanted to experience Japan just like I did in New York City. I imagined walking through the streets of Tokyo, seeing the bright lights and trying all the food. I even imagined visiting a cherry blossom festival in spring. I shared my research with my classmates, and they were excited too. Some of them said they would like to visit Japan with me one day. After finishing my project, I felt more motivated to travel. I started planning a future trip to Japan with my family. I researched flights, hotels, and places to visit. I found out about the famous Mount Fuji and the beautiful temples in Kyoto. I made a list of things we could do, like trying sushi, visiting shrines, and exploring gardens. I also wanted to practice some Japanese before the trip. I found an app on my phone to learn basic Japanese phrases. I started with simple words like hello, thank you, and goodbye. Learning a new language was fun and helped me feel more connected to the culture. I practiced speaking with my family and friends, and they encouraged me to keep going. One weekend, my family and I had a special family meeting to talk about our travel plans. We discussed our budget and what we wanted to do in Japan. Everyone was excited about the idea of visiting a new country together. We talked about different activities we could do and places we wanted to see. We even made a dream board with pictures of Japan to keep us motivated. As we planned, I felt a sense of adventure. I knew that traveling to Japan would be a new and exciting experience. Just like my trip to New York City. I was grateful for the chance to see more of the world and learn about different cultures. Each step in our planning made me more excited for the future. With my travel jar getting fuller and my language skills improving, I felt ready for my next adventure. I couldn't wait to see what the future held. I knew there were many more cities to explore, cultures to experience, and delicious foods to taste. My journey had just begun, and I was eager to discover more of what the world had to offer. As the weeks turned into months, our family travel plans to Japan became more concrete. We set a date for our trip during the spring when the cherry blossoms would be in bloom. Everyone was excited, and we talked about it all the time. My parents began looking for flights and hotels, and I continued to practice my Japanese. One evening, we gathered around the dinner table to discuss our itinerary. My parents had done some research, and they shared their ideas about the places we should visit. We decided we wanted to spend time in Tokyo and Kyoto. My dad suggested visiting a traditional tea house in Kyoto, where we could learn about the tea ceremony. My mom wanted to visit a famous shrine called Fushimi Inari Taisha, known for its beautiful red torii gates. I was thrilled about all the activities we planned. As we talked, I remembered my experiences in New York City. I realized how important it is to be open to new experiences when traveling. I shared my thoughts with my family, and we agreed to try new foods and participate in local customs. We wanted to embrace the culture of Japan fully. I also made a list of things I wanted to bring on the trip. I wanted to take my travel journal to write about my experiences in Japan, just like I did in New York. I plan to take my camera to capture all the beautiful moments, especially the cherry blossoms. I thought it would be wonderful to take pictures of my family together in front of the trees in bloom. As the departure date approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. I had never traveled so far before, and I wanted everything to go well. To ease my nerves, I kept practicing my Japanese phrases every day. I memorized how to say, please, thank you, and excuse me. I also learned how to order food in a restaurant and ask for directions. I felt more confident every day. Finally, the day of our trip arrived. We packed our bags and left early in the morning to catch our flight. At the airport, I could feel the excitement in the air. My family and I checked in, went through security, and found our gate. As we waited to board the plane, I looked at the map of Japan in my travel guide. I couldn't believe I was actually going to visit this amazing country. When we boarded the plane, I found my seat next to the window. As the plane took off, I looked out at the clouds below. I felt a rush of happiness. I was ready for this new adventure. The flight was long, but I used time to read my travel guide and plan even more. I made a list of the first things I wanted to do when we arrived in Japan. After many hours, we finally landed in Tokyo. As we stepped off the plane, I could feel the excitement in my heart. The air was different, and I could see signs in Japanese. Everything felt new and vibrant. We went through customs and picked up our luggage. Then, we took a taxi to our hotel in the city. The taxi ride was thrilling. I looked out the window at the busy streets filled with cars, people, and colorful signs. Tokyo was alive with energy, just like New York City, but different in many ways. I couldn't wait to explore. When we arrived at our hotel, we checked in and quickly dropped off our bags. My family and I were eager to explore Tokyo. We decided to visit a nearby area called Shibuya, famous for its busy crossing and shopping. As we walked to Shibuya, I felt a wave of excitement. I was finally in Japan. As we walked through the streets of Shibuya, I couldn't believe my eyes. The lights were bright, and there were so many people everywhere. I felt a rush of energy just like I did in Times Square. We walked towards the famous Shibuya crossing, which is known for being one of the busiest pedestrian crossings in the world. When we reached the crossing, I saw hundreds of people waiting to cross the street. My family and I stood on the corner, and when the light turned green, everyone started walking at the same time. It was amazing to see so many people moving together. I felt like I was part of something big. After crossing the street, we took a moment to look around. We found a famous statue called Hachiko, which is a symbol of loyalty. The story of Hachiko is very touching. He waited for his owner every day at the train station, even after his owner passed away. I took a picture with my family near his statue to remember this moment. Next, we wanted to try some Japanese food. My parents suggested going to a nearby restaurant to taste ramen. Ramen is a popular noodle soup, and I was excited to try it. We entered a small restaurant that was busy with people. The smell of delicious food filled the air, making my stomach growl. When we sat down, a friendly waiter gave us menus. I looked at the pictures and saw many different kinds of ramen. I practiced my Japanese and ordered our food. "One ramen, please," I said with a smile. The waiter smiled back, and my heart raced with excitement. A few minutes later, the waiter brought our bowls of ramen. The soup looked hot and tasty, with noodles, vegetables, and slices of pork. I took my first bite, and it was delicious. The flavors were rich, and I loved the warm broth. My family enjoyed their meals too, and we shared laughs and stories over the food. After our meal, we decided to explore more of Shibuya. We visited some shops, and I saw many unique items. There were clothes, toys, and souvenirs. I found a cute keychain shaped like a cat, and I bought it as a gift for my little sister. I couldn't wait to give it to her when I returned home. As we walked, we stumbled upon a small park nearby. It was a nice surprise to find a green space in the middle of the city. We decided to sit on a bench and relax for a bit. I pulled out my travel journal and wrote about our first day in Japan. I wrote about the busy streets, the delicious ramen, and how I felt being in this new city. After resting, we continued to explore. We visited a store that sold traditional Japanese items like kimonos and tea sets. I saw beautiful fans and delicate pottery. My mom found a lovely tea set, and we talked about how nice it would be to have tea together at home. I made sure to take pictures of all the interesting things we saw. As the sun began to set, we decided to head back to our hotel. The city was lit up with colorful lights, and everything looked magical. I felt grateful for this day and all the amazing experiences we had. My heart was full of joy and excitement for what tomorrow would bring. When we returned to our hotel, we gathered in our room and talked about our day. We shared our favorite moments, from the crossing to the delicious ramen. I felt happy to be experiencing this adventure with my family. As I went to bed that night, I thought about how much I loved exploring new places. I couldn't wait to see what else Tokyo had to offer. I closed my eyes, dreaming of cherry blossoms, temples, and more delicious food. As my journey came to an end, I felt grateful for all the amazing experiences I had in New York City and Japan. I learned so much about different cultures, tried delicious foods, and made wonderful memories with my family. In New York, I loved the bright lights and busy streets. And I will always remember the delicious ramen and beautiful cherry blossoms in Japan. These adventures opened my eyes to the beauty of the world and inspired me to keep exploring. Now, I am back home, but my heart is full of excitement for future travels. I can't wait to see where my next adventure will take me. There are so many places to explore, new foods to try, and incredible stories to create. I know that the world is big, and there is always something new to discover. Bye.